would like to read to you from Ralph Waldo Emerson's writing called The Oversoul. It's number 531 if you want to follow along as I read. Excuse me. Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds. As there is no screen or ceiling between our heads and the infinite heavens, so there is no bar or wall in the soul where we, the effect, cease and God, the cause, begins. I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for events than the will I call mine. There is deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to all of us. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. It comes to the lowly and the simple. It comes to whoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur. The soul's health consists in the fullness of its reception. Forever and ever, the influx of this better and more universal self is new and unsearchable. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. When it breaks through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. With gratitude, for Ralph Waldo Emerson. This is allergies. I'm sorry. Never fails to kick up as soon as I open my mouth. Delighted to be back among you today. It's been a while, and so many familiar faces and that I've missed, and so I just love being back with you and reconnecting again. I guess it's fair to say that in our human condition these days, we are swimming in a sea of loss. The news coming from Israel and Gaza is saturated with the loss of human life, with the loss of any sense of safety, with the loss of some sense of order and sanity, saturated with the loss of human integrity as human beings exercise violence and destruction against each other. Close to home, as a community and as individuals, we've experienced the loss of dear friends and longtime members of this fellowship. Barb Casso, Sarah Shepard, more recently, Tad Crawford and Carol Loud. They are no longer in our midst. And only last weekend, a beloved island educator, Shannon Carbon, died suddenly. You probably know of others in your own personal experience, and the empty places that they used to occupy are poignant memory reminders of our loss. So in the midst of so much loss of people we have known and loved, where do we find comfort? And how do we live with joy? On Wednesday this past week, I lost my car keys. Now that's a very simple thing, but the anxiety and the frustration that loss caused to set in motion was a really significant draw on my energy for a while. Two dear friends are beginning to cope with the loss of hearing and all the stress that involves. Another friend is gradually losing her mobility to arthritis after a life of vigorous activity. Yet another acquaintance lost his beloved dog after a short time of illness. And still another friend is losing her spouse one day at a time to Alzheimer's. Loss comes in all shapes and sizes, and we swim in a sea of loss. In the midst of so much loss, how do we live with joy? At times it can seem overwhelming. It certainly does for me at times. How do we go on with joyful, creative lives in the midst of such stress and loss? When the ground is almost literally shaking under our feet as we read the headlines each morning, where do we turn for a sense of comfort and safety? A bit of reorientation when the enormity of the world's suffering can be so disorienting. Ancient stories from various traditions have struggled with this since the beginning of recorded time. The writer, or the assembler of the book of Ecclesiastes, begins with an attempt to help us realize that nothing in life is permanent. In the somewhat disturbing opening verses of most translations, the text reads, "Futility, futility. All is futility. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun?" Other translations read, "Vanity, vanity. All is vanity." Or, "Meaningless, meaningless. All is meaningless." Or even worse, "Useless, useless. All is useless." In a somewhat pessimistic way, each translation questions the meaning of all our lives to create a good life. So it's no wonder so many folks cannot warm up to Ecclesiastes. But Rabbi Rami Shapiro suggests a more helpful way of understanding this familiar passage when we're having a conversation about loss. The Hebrew word chevel, that has been translated as futility or vanity or meaninglessness, is more accurately translated as emptying. And how differently it reads then. Emptying upon emptying. Everything is emptying. Chevel also means insubstantial, impermanent, vaporous, as empty and transient as a breath. One moment pours into another. The message of the book of Ecclesiastes is not that life is vain or futile, but rather that it is transient and empty of permanence. Ecclesiastes echoes the Buddhist teachings about the transient nature of all of life. It invites us to a conscious awareness that whatever exists in this moment will not exist in the same way in the next moment. Impermanence means that we live with loss and the discomfort of loss throughout our lives. Our suffering in the face of loss has so much to do with how we want to hold on tightly to what is. When the inevitable emptying happens, we suffer through the loss. And in that suffering, we need to be comforted as we adapt to the loss and the changes any loss might bring to our lives. In her poem, In Blackwater Woods, Mary Oliver offers these thoughts. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, let it go. Living with joy in the midst of terrible loss and letting go of whatever it is that we cherish requires us to live in a kind of creative tension, holding space within ourselves and within our communities for loss and grief on the one hand, and joy and comfort on the other. They exist side by side, neither one canceling out the other. I often observe our human ability to do this at graveside services or at memorial services, where stories are told, memories are lifted up, and in the midst of profound grief, there is laughter and hilarity and joy, even in the face of death. To be truly alive, really alive, is to experience loss, and then to live into whatever new and transient thing awaits on the other side of the loss. In these last 2 weeks, the world has been plunged ever deeper into the sea of loss as we hear reports from Israel and Gaza. In the immediacy of the news of those first few days, so many of us were just rendered speechless. A loss of words, if you will. So many factors determine what we say, how we say it. We struggle to find the correct speech that will communicate deep understanding and compassion without making quick, emotionally laden judgments that may cause more damage than good. We are often at a loss for words. Jews struggle with how to comfort one another. Non-Jews wrestle with how to effectively communicate their caring and concern to their Jewish friends. Compassion for innocent Palestinians often gets caught and struggles to find a voice. And where do we find comfort in the midst of all this profound loss? Over and over the last couple of weeks, it's become clear to me that comfort can be found in many ways, but in at least 2 ways. The first embodies the Buddhist notion of kind speech. Kind speech. Over and over again, I have heard how much comfort and meaning have been received through simple phone calls that say, "I'm thinking of you. How are you doing? I see you're suffering. I care about you." So many stories of this simple and kind communication reverberate around the planet. The second profound source of comfort has been in the coming together in community, in our shared grief, in our confusion, in our pain, in our uncertainty. Across numerous prayer services in the last 2 weeks, both interdenominational and interfaith, comfort has flowed. We do not have to agree with one another about where our sympathies lie in order to have that comfort. We all share in the reality of suffering with one another. We all experience in one way or another the tragic destruction of human life. Coming from a faith tradition that affirms life and the sanctity of human beings, we all have the capacity to mourn the loss of our humanity together when war becomes the solution of choice. So we do what we have done for ages. We begin to let go of the immobilizing fear and grief. We loosen our grip on firmly held biases and prejudices and expectations. We reach out. We come together. We read ancient and modern texts that speak the truth. We center ourselves in prayer and meditation and in the wide variety of spiritual practices that sustain us. We create a safe space where we tell each other how we're coping or not. And for moments at a time, we experience the sense of the reality of comfort. We may even hear faint echoes of the prophet Isaiah's words, his words to Israel in the most profound exile. Comfort, oh, comfort my people, speak tenderly to them. And in these stressful and challenging times, we offer tenderness and kindness to one another. I could not resist, as I was coming to the end of my thoughts, this Zen Buddhist parable about the relationship between clinging and holding on to what is and letting go in order to experience joy. A man was walking through a forest, and he unintentionally fell into a tiger trap. And at the bottom of the pit were sharpened bamboo spikes that were placed there to skewer the tiger and kill it. Well, the man managed to grasp hold tight to a vine that was growing alongside the pit, and thus he avoided the fate that had been set for the tiger. Before he could hoist himself up out of the pit, however, the tiger arrived, and the trap being sprung already, the tiger just kind of peered into the pit and saw his next meal. The man would now have to cling to that vine and wait for the tiger to grow bored and leave. Just then, a mole dug his way out of the side of the pit where the vine was hung and began to gnaw his way through the vine. The man's fate was sealed. If he quickly climbed out of the pit, he would be killed by the tiger. If he held to the vine, the mole would weaken it, and he would fall onto the spikes and his death. Death was imminent and unavoidable. Just then, the man noticed a strawberry growing out of the vine. He plucked that strawberry and popped it into his mouth and exclaimed, "This is the best strawberry I have ever eaten." Death and tragedy are unavoidable. But futility is only present if we imagine there's a way out. There is no way out of hevel, of emptying, of impermanence. And when we're free from false hope and an endless vain search for an exit out of this, when we're free of that, we can experience reality as it is, living through our losses, offering kindness to one another, grieving our losses in community, and then enjoying every strawberry we come across. In the comfort of loving community, we do find ways to enjoy the strawberries in the midst of it all. May it be so.